Welcome back, everyone. Today we're doing something a little different.
Yeah, a little blast from the past.
You're going all the way back to 2011
Wow, ancient history, right.
to take a look at the Panasonic Lumix FZ150.
A camera that's older than some of the apps you're probably using right now.
Exactly. We're going deep on this one.
A deep dive into the past, you could say.
Our source material this time around is a fascinating review by Leo Liang over at lensclear.net.
Oh yeah, Leo really knows his stuff.
He makes a pretty compelling case for why the FZ150 might still be relevant.
Even in 2025.
It sounds crazy, I know, but that's what we're here to find out.
We're gonna unpack it all.
So to set the scene, imagine 2011.
Smartphones.
Not exactly the photography powerhouses they are today.
Most people were still rocking flip phones.
And if you wanted a decent camera,
Your options were basically
bulky DSLRs.
more of those simple point and shoots.
And that's where this camera, the FZ150, came in.
It was this kind of in-between thing, right?
Exactly. It's what they call the bridge camera,
A bridge camera. Bridge the gap, you see.
between the DSLRs and the point and shoots,
Give you some of the power of a DSLR.
but in a smaller, more portable package.
And the FZ150.
Really took that concept and ran with it.
Especially with that zoom lens.
Yeah. Leo could not stop raving about that 24x optical zoom.
Which is equivalent to a 25-600mm lens.
That's just mind-blowing.
For a camera from that era, it was practically unheard of.
Think about it. You could capture,
Wide landscapes.
zoom in on distant wildlife.
All with one lens.
Amazing. So let's get into the nitty-gritty.
The specs.
The FZ150 has a 12.1 megapixel CMOS sensor,
Full HD 1080p video recording.
and it runs on something called the Venus Engine image processor.
Which was pretty cutting edge back then.
But how do those specs hold up in 2025?
Well, let's start with those megapixels.
12.1 megapixels sounds kind of puny compared to today's cameras.
It's true, modern cameras are packing way more megapixels.
But is 12.1 megapixels still enough for everyday use?
For most people, yeah, probably.
Like sharing photos online, printing standard-sized prints?
That sort of thing.
You're not going to be blowing up huge posters.
You'll start to see some limitations if you try to crop heavily.
You might lose some detail and clarity.
But for casual photography, 12.1 megapixels can still get the job done.
Okay, that makes sense. What about that Venus engine?
Ah, the Venus engine.
It's pretty fancy.
It's a big deal back in 2011.
How did it stack up against the competition?
It held its own, for sure.
Allowed for pretty fast processing speeds.
Image quality was decent for the time.
But how does it compare to today's processors?
Technology has come a long way.
Today's cameras and even smartphones.
They use computational photography,
They can combine multiple images,
do all sorts of digital magic.
especially in low light. You're not going to get those capabilities with the FZ150.
It's like comparing a horse-drawn carriage to a Tesla.
Yeah, maybe not the best analogy.
But I get what you're saying.
The technology has advanced so much in those 14 years.
It's a different world.
But even with all that progress,
Leo still finds some surprising strengths in the FZ150.
even in 2025,
That 24x optical zoom.
still a major selling point, especially when you look at the price.
Think about how much it would cost to get that kind of zoom range today.
With separate lenses, it would be a fortune,
And for certain types of photography.
like birding or wildlife photography.
Yeah.
That kind of zoom is essential.
You need that reach to capture those amazing shots.
But doesn't that much zoom make the camera shaky?
That's a good question.
It seems like it would be hard to hold steady.
The FZ150 does have some image stabilization.
But is it enough to counteract all that zoom?
It's not as advanced as what you find in newer cameras,
So you might need a tripod,
or a very steady hand.
especially at the longer focal lengths,
But that's a trade-off you have to consider.
for that incredible zoom range.
You might need a little extra support.
Makes sense.
So we've talked about the zoom.
But Leo must see something else in this camera.
He does. And it might sound counterintuitive,
Counterintuitive.
but he actually highlights the FZ150's simplicity as a strength.
Simplicity. In 2025,
I know, right? It's like a breath of fresh air.
in a world where cameras are getting more and more complex,
Menu upon menu upon menu.
the FZ150 keeps it simple.
Physical dials and buttons.
You can adjust settings quickly.
Without having to dive into menus.
It's a more tactile experience.
More hands-on.
So it's kind of like going back to basics,
Exactly. There's a certain satisfaction to using a camera like that.
where you have direct control over the settings.
It's a different way of shooting.
So who does Leo think this camera is still relevant for in 2025?
Well, he has a few target audiences in mind.
Like who?
First off, he recommends it as a great camera for beginners.
Beginners. Really?
You'd think a newer camera would be better.
All the bells and whistles.
But Leo argues that the FZ150 provides a great way to learn the fundamentals.
Without getting overwhelmed.
It lets you experiment.
With aperture, shutter speed, ISO.
All those core concepts.
Without breaking the bank.
It's like learning to drive a stick shift before graduating to an automatic.
That's a great analogy.
Master the basics on a camera like this.
And then you're ready to move on to more advanced cameras.
If you choose to.
That makes a lot of sense.
Okay, so that's beginner.
Who else does Leo have in mind?
He also recommends it for enthusiasts.
Particularly those who travel frequently.
Exactly.
Because it's so compact.
Exactly.
You could take it anywhere.
When in that zoom range,
You're prepared for any photo opportunity.
landscapes, architecture, candid shots.
You don't need to carry a heavy bag of lenses.
Just slip the FZ150 in your pocket and go.
Convenience and versatility.
That's what it's all about.
Okay, beginners and travel enthusiasts.
And of course,
Nature and bird photographers.
with that zoom lens, it's a no-brainer.
But we did talk about those image quality limitations earlier,
Right, that's something to keep in mind.
especially if you're shooting in challenging conditions.
Or if you need to do a lot of cropping
You might wish you had a newer camera.
with better image quality.
So it's a trade-off
That incredible zoom.
for some potential compromises on image quality.
And ultimately, it's up to each photographer
To decide if that trade-off is worth it.
for their needs.
Right.
So we've talked a lot about the pros.
But let's not forget about the cons.
No camera's perfect,
And the FZ150 definitely has some shortcomings.
especially in 2025.
So let's dive into those.
What might make someone think twice?
About picking up an FZ150 today.
Well, like we touched on earlier, image quality, especially in low light.
Yeah, that's going to be a noticeable difference compared to modern cameras.
Right, you'll likely see more noise
Boy.
or grain in those low light photos.
Okay, so more noise, more grain,
And the dynamic range
dynamic range.
won't be as wide.
So what does that mean? Like in practical terms, for someone actually using the camera?
Yeah, good question.
Like if I'm trying to take pictures at a dimly lit restaurant or a concert,
Uh-huh.
am I going to be disappointed?
Well, it's not that those situations are impossible.
Okay.
You can still shoot in those conditions.
Right.
But you just got to manage those expectations.
Yeah.
You might need to bump up the ISO,
ISO, okay.
which will introduce, more noise.
More noise, right? We talked about that.
And you won't have as much flexibility
When you're editing.
to recover details in the shadows and highlights.
Ah, I see. So less flexibility.
Yeah.
So maybe not the ideal camera for like...
If low light performance is your top priority,
Right.
there are definitely better options out there.
In 2025.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
What else?
What else is on that list of shortcomings?
Autofocus speed.
Ah, yeah.
That's
it
another area where the FZ150,
shows its age.
it's not terribly slow,
Okay.
but it's not going to keep up with the lightning fast autofocus,
In those modern cameras.
especially mirrorless cameras.
So like if I'm trying to capture,
fast moving subjects.
yeah, like my dog catching a Frisbee
Mm-hmm.
or my kids scoring the winning goal.
You might end up with,
Yeah. A lot of blurry shots.
it's possible.
Okay, so action shots.
The autofocus is going to struggle.
Probably
What else? Leo also mentions the lack of
image stabilization.
advanced image stabilization
Yeah.
as a drawback.
Okay, back up a second.
Yeah.
What is image stabilization?
Okay, so imagine you're holding your camera, trying to take a photo,
Yeah.
and your hand is shaking a little bit.
Right.
Image stabilization, or IS.
Yeah.
It's essentially like having tiny gyroscopes
inside the camera.
inside the camera that compensate for that movement.
So they keep the image sharp
Exactly.
even if my hands are shaky.
Even if your hands are a little shaky.
It's like having
a built-in Steadicam.
a built-in Steadicam for your camera.
Yeah, you got it.
That's cool.
And the modern image stabilization systems,
Mhm.
they're incredibly effective.
Okay.
You can shoot at slower shutter speeds
Right.
and still get those sharp pictures.
So with the FZ150,
You'll need to be more careful,
about camera shake.
especially in low light
Right.
or when you're using that long zoom.
Oh, that makes sense, yeah.
You'll probably want to use a tripod more often.
Okay, good to know. So
It seems like,
it seems like there are some real trade-offs to consider with this camera.
yeah, there are always trade-offs.
So with all these limitations in 2025,
Yeah.
why is Leo even recommending the FZ150?
Right.
What's the appeal beyond
Good question.
the price and that amazing zoom?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
Yeah.
And Leo, he addresses that head-on
Okay.
in his review.
Okay.
He talks about how we've become so fixated
On specs.
on specs and the latest technology
Uh-huh.
that we kind of forget about the core values of photography.
So it's not all about megapixels
It's not just about the megapixels.
and autofocus speeds.
Right. There's more to it than that.
Okay, so what is it about then?
Leo argues that sometimes limitations can actually be beneficial.
Beneficial, how so?
They can force us to be more creative,
More creative,
to
interesting.
think more carefully about composition, and to really understand
Fundamentals.
the fundamentals, the relationship between aperture, shutter speed, ISO.
So, in a way,
It's like going back to the basics
using a camera like the FZ150.
could actually make you a better photographer.
That's Leo's argument.
That's his argument.
That's an interesting perspective.
It's about slowing down,
Yeah.
being more deliberate, and
Right.
focusing on those fundamentals.
It's easy to get caught up in the gear race,
Oh, absolutely.
always wanting the latest and greatest,
Yeah.
thinking you need that to take good photos.
And there's definitely a place for the latest tech.
Right.
But Leo's point is
Yeah.
older cameras, like the FZ150, they can still offer a valuable learning experience.
Right.
And they can be incredibly rewarding to use.
Absolutely. And like you said, for certain types of photography,
For birding, for example,
the FZ150's zoom range,
that's still a huge asset.
even if it has some quirks,
Even with those quirks, yeah.
when you factor in the price,
At price, right.
you can find these cameras used.
For a fraction of the cost of a new camera.
Exactly. So it becomes even more appealing.
It does.
Okay, so the FZ150,
It might not be the flashiest camera,
it might not be the newest
but it could be a great choice.
for certain types of photographers.
It all comes down to understanding your needs and priorities.
Right. What are you actually going to be using this camera for?
If you're obsessed with having the latest and greatest,
Yeah, the FZ150.
the FZ150 is probably not for you.
Yep.
But if you're looking for,
A camera with a specific set of strengths,
okay, like what?
like that amazing zoom,
Mm-hmm.
a more hands-on shooting experience,
Right.
and a budget-friendly price,
It's hard to argue with that,
then FZ150 might be worth a look.
even in 2025.
It's a testament to the idea
To the idea that,
that older technology can still hold its own, especially for like fulfilling a niche need
right, it's not for everyone.
or providing a unique shooting experience.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about the FZ150,
The technical aspects
the pros and cons. Who might find it valuable?
in 2025.
Yeah.
But I'm curious about your personal take
Oh, okay.
on this whole idea of revisiting older tech.
Interesting question.
I mean, we're constantly bombarded.
With new gadgets.
New gadgets, updates, new everything.
It's overwhelmed.
So why go back in time?
Why go back? That's a great question.
Yeah.
And honestly, I think there's a certain charm
A charm.
to using older cameras, older technology. It's like stepping back in time
Stepping back in time.
and experiencing how things used to be.
I get that. It's like when you listen to music on vinyl,
Yes. Exactly.
there's a different feel to it.
A different feel.
And with cameras,
Yeah.
it's the same thing.
It's the same.
You have to slow down,
Be more deliberate.
more deliberate with your settings,
Yeah.
really think about your composition.
It's a more mindful way of shooting.
It is. It's more mindful.
Yeah.
Sometimes those limitations
Yeah, the limitations we've been talking about.
can spark creativity in ways that you wouldn't expect.
Yeah, you're forced to think outside the box.
It's like,
It's like a chef with limited ingredients.
oh, that's a good one.
Has to come up with a creative dish.
Right. Got to work with what you've got.
Constraints can breed innovation?
I like that. Constraints can breed innovation.
Absolutely.
So it's not just about nostalgia then.
No, it's not just nostalgia.
There's a real value in exploring older technology.
There is, yeah.
Okay.
And beyond those creative benefits, there's also a sustainability aspect.
Sustainability, right?
Instead of always chasing the latest and greatest,
Yeah, always upgrading.
why not give a second life to a perfectly capable camera?
I like that.
Reduce, reuse, recycle.
It's about being more mindful of our consumption
Absolutely.
and finding value in things.
Finding value in things that might otherwise be forgotten.
Right, those hidden gems.
Exactly.
So as we wrap up
Okay.
this deep dive into the Panasonic Lumix FZ150,
The FZ150.
what's the key takeaway?
What do we want our listeners to walk away with? I think for me, the big takeaway
Yeah.
is that we shouldn't dismiss older tech so quickly.
Yeah, the FZ150,
It's a perfect example of that.
a camera that's over a decade old, can still be relevant
Still has value.
in 2025.
Yeah, and it's a reminder that
Value in photography, what does that even mean?
it's not always about the latest specs or the
Right.
highest price tag.
Exactly. And Leo, he really emphasizes that in his review.
He does.
He talks about how the FZ150's
It
value,
lies in its unique strengths.
it's that zoom lens.
That amazing zoom lens.
Right. And it's about helping photographers learn the fundamentals
Without getting bogged down.
by all the complexity
All the features.
of modern cameras.
He even suggests
Yeah.
that the FZ150 could be a valuable tool.
Even for experienced photographers.
Yeah, those who are looking to reconnect.
With a more, I guess, hands-on approach.
More deliberate.
Slower.
And slow down.
Appreciate the process.
Appreciate the process.
Don't be afraid to experiment with something a little different.
Exactly.
And that message,
It resonates.
it goes beyond just cameras, right?
It goes beyond cameras, yeah.
This is about our relationship with technology in general.
I think you hit the nail on the head.
We live in a world of instant gratification.
Oh, absolutely.
Everything has to be new, fast, shiny.
The newest, the fastest, the shiniest.
But there's beauty in the old stuff, too.
There is.
Sometimes it's nice to rediscover the things that have...
Stood the test of time.
Yeah, those things that last.
Absolutely.
So it's about
finding the tools that work for you.
Yeah.
The tools that inspire you.
That help you express your creativity.
Doesn't matter how old they are.
Yeah, it's not about the age.
Or the specs.
It's about finding the right tool for the job.
Oh, and who knows?
Yeah.
Maybe that tool
Maybe it's something you already have.
is sitting in your closet.
Gathering dust.
Yeah.
Just waiting to be rediscovered.
So to everyone listening, I encourage you,
Take a little deeper.
look beyond those specs
Don't get caught up in the hype
and consider the unique possibilities
that older tech can offer.
You might be surprised by what you find.
This has been a fascinating deep dive.
It has.
I'm already thinking about all the old tech I have lying around.
I know, me too.
Thanks for taking us on this journey.
Oh, it's been my pleasure.
And to all of you listening out there,
Happy shooting.
happy shooting.